Hello, this is Jeff Malone, the X is Silent. Now, if you happen to catch my last video review of Saturday Night Live, you'll remember that I didn't go into detail in the portion of that review regarding that night's musical guest, and that was because I had plenty to say, more than could fit into just a segment of that video. So, enough to justify a video of its own. So here we go. Here is my take on Lana Del Rey's appearance on the January 14th, 2012 episode of Saturday Night Live. Now, if you've been on the internet at all in like the last 2 weeks or so, you'll have gotten the impression, most likely, that Lana was quite possibly the worst musical guest in SNL history. Now, I actually didn't believe she was that bad. I thought she was more bizarre than bad, and therefore, because she was bizarre, I mean, she wasn't particularly good. It was just the bizarreness, the unusualness of how bad, of the way in which she was bad, was why she's gotten all this attention. I mean, quite frankly, I think in the past few years, you could find a bunch of acts who were worse on the show than she was. Like this current season, I'd say the worst musical guest so far has been Maroon 5, who I can enjoy sometimes. I like a few of their songs, but I thought their performances this season were just a little boring, a little listless. Not unusually terrible. But just nothing special. As far as, like the worst musical guests in, let's say, the last 5 years, I would say, definitely not Lana Del Rey. My choice would be Bon Jovi back in 2009. And, we're talking about 2000s Bon Jovi, not 1980s good Bon Jovi. We're talking about 2000s bad Bon Jovi. They're, singing their whatever song, like something about Superman. And, I think the general consensus among the music cognoscenti is that current day Bon Jovi stuff is not stacking up there. And their most recent appearance on SNL did nothing to dissuade me of that opinion. But here's the thing. They came on the show. They were as bad as I think most people would have expected them to be. But they weren't bad in any unusual way, so we all just accepted that they were bad and then moved on and didn't really say that much about it. But with Lana, she here's someone who most viewers of SNL probably hadn't heard of before or only vaguely heard of, and she no way fits the normal definition of an SNL musical guest, and people are all up in arms about it. So, to really get an idea of exactly what sort of, where she fits in the history of musical guests on SNL, I think we should look back at other memorable musical guests who bombed on the show, and how Lana compares to those guests, or how she doesn't compare to them. Now, one of the major criticisms people had about her was her pitch, especially during the song she performed first, Video Games, where she didn't stick to one pitch. She would change from this breathy, cooing style, sort of like a baby, a woman pretending to sound like a baby, that sexy, sultry, smoky voice. Then suddenly she'd go to this basso profundo, almost, was what she was going for. And I think, neither of those pitches was bad in and of itself. It was just that the change between those two settings was so jarring that it didn't quite work for just about everyone. Which calls to mind some other past SNL guests who had vocal issues. If you go back to the Rolling Stones appearance in 1978, Mick Jagger clearly had a cold or something of that nature, and his singing was particularly phlegmatic throughout their performances on that show, and it was not fun to listen to. And then when you had Laura Branigan appearing in 1982, around the time of her hit song Gloria, she also must have had a cold or something. She was having trouble hitting her high notes, which she had been known to hit pretty well, but her voice actually cracks during the performance of Gloria when it gets to the chorus. And so yeah, that didn't quite work out. But you know, as far as I could tell, Lana didn't have a cold or anything. And then there's, of course, the crown jewel of musical guest bombs, Ashlee Simpson in 2004, who was had the wrong vocal backing track play at the beginning of her second song, and she didn't know what to do, so she sort of just did a little jig and then just ran off the stage. And some people thought Lana looked as nervous as Ashlee did when that happened, and that was perhaps the explanation for why her lack of stage presence, for one thing. Yeah, and initially when I was watching it, I thought she did look pretty nervous. She didn't look like she knew what to do besides sing. You know, what to do physically, but you know, what to do to accompany her singing. You know, she was just twirling around and pulling at her hair. But then after watching it subsequent times, I was like, you know, I think that's what she wanted to do. You know, it does seem odd, but her music is odd, and her music videos are odd. She has an odd stage presence. Her performances, her SNL performances, were always going to be odd, no matter how good or how bad they ended up being. And so then I think an apt comparison might be Kesha, who appeared memorably 2 years ago. And she was dressed, she had an American flag cape on, and then she appeared in body paint on her second performance, and she had backup dancers in astronaut costumes. And I personally thought that was one of the best musical performances that season. Not that many people thought so, but love it or hate it, it was quite clear that Kesha was doing exactly what she wanted to be doing. So I was all set to come on here and say, you know what, Lana was most reminiscent of Kesha, because she made a bizarre decision with how her performances were going to go, but that's how she wanted it to be. She wanted it to be bizarre, and a lot of people just weren't able to accept how bizarre it was. You know, a few people have made concessions that it was bizarre, but that it still sounded bad. But you know what? Here's the thing. Here's who I actually think she most resembles in terms of the history of SNL musical guests. Joe Cocker. Now, you may be thinking, now, wait a minute, Joe Cocker didn't bomb. He was certainly, you know, he had an unusual stage presence. Well, you're right. I'm not saying, you know, she was as bad as he was or as good as he was, rather. But, you know, Joe Cocker, John Belushi was famous on SNL for his Joe Cocker impression, and when Joe Cocker finally appeared on the show, John Belushi came on right beside him and sang the second verse of Feelin' Alright as Joe Cocker. And, you know, so here's someone, Joe Cocker, with one of the most unusual stage presences among musicians in musical history. But when he appeared on SNL, people had been familiar with him. He'd been around for maybe like 10 years or so, and SNL fans in particular were familiar with him thanks to Belushi's impression. But, Lana Del Rey, most people had never heard of her. They weren't familiar with this stage presence, so they didn't know what to make of it. And I don't think Lana's appearance worked out quite as well as she may have hoped, but really, it was far, far from as bad as some people were saying it was. And, one other thing to consider, she got people talking. A hell of a lot more people know about her than they did before she was on SNL. And I wonder if that was her goal all along. She was just trying to be memorable, and it didn't really matter how good or how bad it was. She actually kind of reminded me of Zach Galifianakis in a way, who likes to be deconstructionalist during some of his stand-up performances, where he's like, why are you the audience? What is this? Why should you, the audience, come here to this comedy club and expect me to just stand up here for an hour and make you laugh? Like, what is that? What is this whole charade or whatever it is? And based on interviews that I've watched or read with Lana Del Rey, she kind of feels the same way about musical performances, that they're patently strange and unnatural, that a bunch of people would be gathered around just to watch you perform. I think Zach Galifianakis has been more successful with that sort of attitude because it's a funny way of looking at things, and he's a comedian. But Lana Del Rey's view that that's the same or a similar funny way of looking at things, but she's a musician. She's not saying, hey, look at me be funny. She's saying, hey, listen to me sing and watch me perform. So she wasn't following the rules. And that's when you don't follow the rules, no matter how good or bad you are, you're gonna create a bit of an uproar. And that's what happened with Lana Del Rey.